JazakAllah Khair. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. If you don't mind, I'm not able to share my screen, so if you could make me host or allow participant sharing so I can share the ayat, the translation. JazakAllah Khair. So, we're going to continue, inshallah, where we left off last week. And hopefully, inshallah, today will be our final session on Surah al-Kahf. So, without any further delay, let me just... Are you guys still able to see my screen? Yeah, let me... Okay. So, oops. Okay. So last week we concluded the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, or as some say Khadr alayhi salam, depending on the opinion about if he's a prophet or not. Inshallah, today we'll begin and conclude the story of the Qarnayn and the last few ayats that end the surah after. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in ayah number 83. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. Okay, so quick recap on Khidr alayhi salam. So he was the man that Musa alayhi salam sought out to learn from when Musa alayhi salam was informed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there was somebody on the earth who possessed knowledge that he didn't have. Musa alayhi salam was very keen on learning from him. And we went into a lot of the lessons that kind of we can take from that generally, but he was the one who, through whom Musa alayhi salam witnessed a lot of seemingly peculiar events that then much wisdom was present underneath, right, beyond the surface. And we'll kind of reflect on that as we kind of recap all the stories in a little bit towards the end. But Khidr was bestowed this knowledge by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was given this knowledge of some of the inner workings or some of the inner dimensions of this material reality of the world around. And one reflection actually on that we didn't make last week that perhaps may be of of benefit. One of the reflections that some of these scholars of ihsan make is that Musa alayhi salam was given a type of knowledge that was of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a certain type of knowledge into the inner realities of spirituality, into the inner realities of a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Musa alayhi salam had the distinct honor of being spoken to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and speaking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly in this material existence, in this world. And so thus, with that station and also with the station of being a messenger who was receiving revelation directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or through the intermediary of Jibreel alayhi salam, he had that that opening, that knowledge of those realities, right, of that relationship. Whereas Khidr was given knowledge of the realities of this world that Musa alayhi salam didn't have. And likewise, Khidr alayhi salam didn't have the insight into those spiritual realities that Musa alayhi salam had. And thus Musa alayhi salam was still, even without this, Musa alayhi salam, as we understand, is superior, more virtuous, right, with because of his standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than Khidr was. But in spite of that, this is just kind of another iteration or another a detail into that, right? To have that awareness and that inner or that awareness and that knowledge of that spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far superior than just having a deeper understanding of this worldly reality, of this material existence. So anyways, that's just another reflection that the scholars of ihsan make about the different knowledges that they possessed. And also these are both types of knowledge that people as they develop and as they grow in their spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their alignment with, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for them in terms of what they should do and not do, right? There is a potential that they will be also given greater insight into these realities, right? Obviously not to that extent, but it's possible that, some of the deeper realities of both this material worldly existence and their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala become a little bit more apparent. And that's a different topic and a different discussion altogether. But just to kind of recap a little bit. So we'll continue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they ask you about the Qarnayn. And the reason why, this ayah begins يَسْأَلُونَكَ is because if you remember in the very beginning, the introduction, we talked about the leaders of Mecca having gotten information from the Jews in Medina before the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. They were given a specific set of questions to ask the Prophet ﷺ to try and confirm his legitimacy, or try and question his authenticity. And one of them was about the man who traversed east and west. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they're asking you about Dhul Qarnayn. This person that they're asking about is Dhul Qarnayn. And Dhul Qarnayn means literally the one of two horns. Qarn means a horn, so Qarnayn is two horns. And there's a lot of discussion about what is referred to, what does this mean, what does Dhul Qarnayn mean? Just very briefly, some of the opinions that are prevalent are that Dhul Qarnayn was a king that, if you guys just excuse me for one moment. Apologies. So, as I was saying, Dhul Qarnayn was a, most scholars of Tafsir, there's also discussion about whether he was a prophet or not. The majority views that he was not a prophet, but that he was a righteous ruler. And he was a worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed him with great blessings in terms of, power and dominion on the earth. So the reason why he was called Dhul Qarnayn, there's different opinions about that as well. The most prominent of them are that because his dominion expanded and covered both the east and the west of the world, the two corners, so to speak, of the world. And in Arabic, the term that's used is qarnay ash-shams, like the two sides that the sun rises and sets on, because his dominion encompassed that expanse. The term, his title Dhul Qarnayn came. Another opinion is that it was actually more of a physical descriptor, based on like how his, some opinions mentioned the way his crown was, right? His crown had maybe two horns, or two kind of elevated parts to it on either side. Another is an opinion about his actual hair, his physical hair, that it was, that it was long and had two like ponytail type parts on each side. Another opinion is that he controlled both Rome and Persia simultaneously, and those were world superpowers, obviously, for a large part of human history. And so he simultaneously had dominion over both Rome and Persia. And so Dhul Qarnayn meaning those two empires. Again, there's many different opinions, but what we understand is that his dominion was quite unique in human history, in that he was in control over a large portion of the entire earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him and facilitated that for him. So the ayah continues, قُلْ سَأَتْلُو عَلَيْكُم مِّنْهُ ذِكْرًا, that I will tell you, or I'll recite to you, about him. I'll mention some things about him, right? And these are slight details that don't encompass everything about who he was, but they are sufficient to address the issue. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is common throughout the Quran, highlights those things that are important for us to know. Or we mentioned in the beginning, one of the earlier sessions that we had, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't go into any extraneous or unnecessary details in the Quran. So if a detail is mentioned, it's because there's something important in that detail, and not just mentioning dates and times and places and names for the sake of them, but if there's specific benefit. And there's also, similar as the case in the Surah of al-Qarnayn, is that there aren't many historical details about his travels or his kingdom, but there are enough to, number one, sufficiently address what was being asked, and also for us to highlight those important moral principles and those lessons from his story that are of importance to us to take from. Right, the Quran is intended to be acted upon, and so these are these lessons that we can take a lesson from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues and says, "Inna makkanna lahu fil ardi wa atainahu min kulli shay'in sababa." We established his power in the land, right? We gave him an established footing on this earth. And again, that's in reference to the dominion control he had over large portions and large empires and different peoples and nations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, like the story of the man of two gardens, Allah mentions that he is the one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gave him this, who bestowed this blessing upon him. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا, and we gave him a means to everything. So many mufassirun comment on this, and they refer to, for example, his large army or his large resources or his technological prowess or his wealth. In reality, all of these things apply, right? Allah says that with every endeavor, every thing that he set out, Allah created a means for him to accomplish that, right? So whether that be his ability to have conquered and ruled over so many different diverse sets of people and diverse sets of land and things like that, or whether it be his military might or his physical strength or whatever the case is, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created and facilitated a means for all of those ends. فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, Allah says, the next ayah. And so in one instance, he traveled, he followed a specific path. He followed a specific, one of his journeys took him in a specific direction. فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, so he traveled, and the understanding of the implication is that this is also with a portion of his army, perhaps, or a portion of his resources, or those that were his subjects or under his control. حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس, so until he reached the setting of the sun, right? And so this is an allusion that many the Mufassirun comment. It's an allusion to the westernmost lands, the westernmost parts of the earth, Maghrib al-Shams, where the sun sets. وَجَدَهَا تَغْرُبُ فِي عَيْنٍ حَمِئَةٍ, he found it setting in a cloudy spring. And this word hami'ah, it means something that's muddied or murky. In another recitation, the word is not hami'ah, but it is hamiyah, which is a boiling or a hot spring. Both can apply. So meaning that the body of water in this land was both cloudy, perhaps, or that it was also of a high temperature as well. Now, obviously the sun doesn't set in a spring or in a body of water, but what is meant here is that, again, the furthest most area, meaning that there was nothing beyond, there was no lands or no cities or no nations beyond this point, right? It was the furthest most point, and so it was as though the sun is setting there. And if you notice, like, even for example, when you're looking at the ocean or something like that, or a body of water, it seems as though the sun is setting into that. Obviously it's not, the sun is much further, but it seems as though the sun is setting into that body of water as it sets, right? So this is what's meant here. وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة ووجد عندها قوما, and he found a people that were inhabitants there. قلنا يا ذا القرنين إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Dhul Qarnayn was given the option, right? Given the the decision by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that about how to rule over these people, how to exercise his power and his authority over these people. Okay, and this ayah gives you a bit of an insight into the type of person Dhul Qarnayn was. Now, some mufassirun, they use this to try and prove the fact that he was a prophet, because Allah says قُلْنَا يَا ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we said to him, O Dhul Qarnayn. But we understand as part of our belief system that there is the ability for human beings to receive communication or receive inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without being prophets. If that comes directly through an angel or directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is understood to be wahi, revelation, making somebody a prophet. But there's also what we understand to be ilham, which is inspiration, that ultimately comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it isn't a sign or isn't directly from Allah or through the through an angel, and is not a sign of prophethood. And what is there's examples of that within the Quran as well. Um, for example, the story of the mother of Musa alayhi salam, who we know was not she herself was not a prophet, but she was given inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Um, for those who say Khidr was not a prophet, the same could be applied. Um, for those, there's a minority opinion that holds that Maryam salam alayha was a prophet, but for those who say she is not, or for the majority opinion that says that she is not, also the same could apply there as well. And there's countless examples that we could go to, Luqman and Hakim, many others. And that's obviously not something that is even restricted to the past. That can be something that occurs with somebody today, meaning that they receive ilham. And there's a lot more technicalities beyond that. It's not like something that acts as, for example, any sort of new legislation, or no kind of rulings can be taken from it, but it's more so an indication or a directive towards something good that already confirms something that we already have from the message of the Prophet ﷺ, right? It's, there is no more prophethood. So in any case, Allah says that He had the option to either punish these people or cause them torment, or be lenient with them, or take kindly to them. Okay, show them kindness. Now, when you consider just the historical realities that are at play in any time, in any civilization, those who are always in a position of authority and power, they usually abuse that power. And so they usually take advantage of those who they exercise control over, especially when it comes to conquering a land or taking control of a place. That is usually done violently, that is usually done without regard for the population that's there, without regard for the people, with no concern for what is already existing. But Dhul Qarnayn was such that his dominion did not mean that he, as his dominion grew, or as his control over the earth grew, he didn't oppress people, or he didn't take advantage of people, or he didn't harm people in these expeditions. Rather, he was, he was given control. He overtook these lands and these places, and he exercised justice and humility and lenience and consideration for the people. So, with these two options, Dhul Qarnayn responds, قال أما من ظلم فسوف نعذبه. So the way that we will address, the way that we will rule, the way that our kingdom will operate, is that for those who have warranted punishment, for those who have done wrong, for those who have acted oppressively on this earth, then we will punish them, right? They will be taken to task accordingly. And so, for example, you imagine that he comes across a people who have a tyrannical ruler, who have a tyrannical system of governance. And so those who are in positions of who are oppressors, and those who are abusing power, then they'll be taken to task. ثم يرد إلى ربه فيعذبه عذابا نكرا. And then they will be returned to their Lord, right? Meaning that after this life is over, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will likewise take them to account and punish them even more severely. And so you see, even in you understand he was a righteous person because his understanding was tethered and was tied to an awareness of the hereafter, right? He's even talking about the hereafter here, the day of judgment. وَأَمَّا مَنْ آمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. And as for the one who believes and acts righteously, فَلَهُ جَزَاءً الْحُسْنَى. They will have the best of rewards. وَسَنَقُولُ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِنَا يُسْرًا. Right? And we will make, what we will ask of them will be that which will make their life easy and bring about ease for them. So again, his his goals here in this conquest or in this authority was not that he just expand his power for its own sake, but that he establish and implement justice and the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these lands that he governed over. And that, you know, the system of governance or control is intended to bring ease to people and take to task and take to account those who abused their roles and those who abused their responsibilities. Now, every advanced, every civilization, every you know, power that has existed on Earth has either you know, outright claim that they don't care about these things, that they're not motivated by justice, but they're either motivated by some sort of you know, ethnic affiliation or some sort of family affiliation or some sort of monarchy or whatever, or at the very best, they, you know, externally claim to, you know, support these lofty ideals, but in reality, the situation was much different. So in reality, there's much classism, there's much nepotism, there's much xenophobia or whatever there is, while appearing or while, you know, while ostensibly claiming to be, you know, intended for the well-being of people, right? But Dhul Qarnayn was motivated by a desire to follow and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so this was the nature of his rule. ثم أتبع سببا, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he continued his travel. All right, he took another path. حتى إذا بلغ مطلع الشمس. So now Allah says he reached the easternmost parts of the earth, right, where the sun rises. وجدها تطلع على قوم لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا. He found it rising on a people who didn't have anything other than it, right? They didn't have any other means of shelter from it, from the sun. And this could mean that number one, they weren't advanced in terms of their physical infrastructure, in terms of their civilization, meaning that they didn't have large buildings or anything like that to protect them from the sun, or they hadn't advanced in that way. Or it could also refer to their just physical garments, right? They didn't have physical clothing, that they were impoverished, or they were you know, not advanced in that way. And so his you know, his control and his rule extended even, you know, to civilizations that were well developed, that were further along, and that were less developed, and that were less well off. كذلك وقد أحطنا بما لديه خبرا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, thus our knowledge or our awareness encompassed everything that he did and everything that he possessed. So these ayats so far indicate the expansiveness of his rule and the you know, the deep you know, the various areas where his power extended, right? And so what's of note so far here is that, as we mentioned, his power doesn't drive him mad or doesn't cause him to lose focus. Rather, his aim in his power is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is obviously quite rare. It's, you know, we're mentioning it briefly for the sake of time, but it's a lesson that requires much reflection and thought, even for us, right? You find that there are many people who complain or who rightfully call out transgressions by those in positions of power and authority. But those same people with the, you know, smaller vestiges of power that they do have, or the smaller means of control that they do exercise, whether it be within their own family or certain relationships, or you know, the certain wealth that they might have over people who are less well off or whatever, you find abuses in power. So it's not a black and white thing. You know, there is no guarantee that those who complain and levy all these criticisms, you know, over people in positions of authority would not abuse the authority in a similar or worse manner were they given it, right? And the test of that is, you know, look at the power that you do exercise, the control that you do exercise, the resources that you do exercise, that you do exercise control over. How are you using them, right? Are you abusing them? Are you using them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how are you utilizing those resources? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا. Now a third path, or a third portion of his journeys are being elaborated upon. حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ بَيْنَ السَّدَّيْنِ, until he reached a place that were between two, said is like a mountain, or like a wall. So what's mentioned here is that what's described by the Mufassirun is that this was a place, a valley between two mountains that was kind of covered on either side. وَجَدَ مِن دُونِهِمَا قَوْمًا لَا يَكَادُونَ يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا. So he found between them, or beside them, in that area, a people who couldn't understand anything. They couldn't understand anything that that was being said to them. They couldn't communicate with Dhul Qarnayn. And some of the implications that can be taken from this is that these were people that lived in a remote area, or they were cut off from civilization. Why? Because in a civilization that's interconnected, right? Not everybody speaks the same language, but there is at least some people who do. Some people who are familiar with neighboring areas, or who have traveled, or who have made some connections with the outside world and outside communities. But in this community, they were in such a state, in such a position that they didn't have that access, right? And so their communication and their ability to kind of interact with Dhul-Qarnayn was limited. And we can kind of imply other things from this, that perhaps maybe they were also an underdeveloped a people, or that they were kind of in a remote place, or whatever the case was. Now this highlights, number one, the extensiveness, right? Just the reach of the Qarnayn's control and his empire and his dominion, and also just how far removed they were from others. So they still communicated. They still had a need that they wanted to communicate with the Qarnayn. Now, if you consider that, you take these assumptions about what might have been the reality of these people, you understand that they're in a position of vulnerability, right? Especially in comparison to the Qarnayn. They're in a position of vulnerability, number one, just because of their differing circumstances, but number two, because of what they're about to divulge to him. But they still find comfort, and they still find a desire to disclose an issue, a problem, a social problem that they're having to the Qarnayn, so that he can address it. So again, this is another indication of his rule with justice, of his concern and care for people, of the way, the mannerism in which he went about his rule, right? Him being a righteous servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قالوا يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض فهل نجعل لك خرجا على أن تجعل بيننا وبينهم سدا. They said, "Oh, Dhul Qarnayn, Ya'juj and Ma'juj," right? Which in English and in the other scriptures is translated, referred to as Gog and Magog, right? And there's much conversation about who these people are, especially as it pertains to the day of judgment and the ends of times. This is kind of also a different discussion, and perhaps we might give some detail here. But suffice it to say that in this instance, they were a people who were causing much mischief and difficulty for this aforementioned group of people that were complaining to the Qarnayn, that were describing their situation. So, إِنَّ يَأْجُوجَ وَمَأْجُوجَ مُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They are causing us great difficulty and distress in this land. They are so Gog and Magog are a people. The majority of a scholarly opinion indicates that they are a civilization of people. There are more minority of fringe opinions that say that they are not. There's question about whether they are humans or not. And again, that's a further detailed discussion. But the normative opinion is that they are a group of people, and that there are even indications in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that indicate that they are children of Adam. So meaning that they're human beings. So they're causing corruption in the land. They're making life difficult, whether it be by oppressing us or causing physical harm to us or causing ruining our land or pillaging our resources or whatever the case is. فهل نجعل لك خرجا على أن تجعل بيننا وبينهم سدا. So can we pay you? Can we enlist you to develop or create a type of barrier between us? Okay. قال ما مكنني فيه ربي خير فأعينوني بقوة أجعل بينكم وبينهم ردما. Dhul Qarnayn responds and says, what my Lord has established, my Lord has established for me, or the position that He has given me, is better, right, than anything that you can offer me. I already have more, so there's nothing that you can physically, materially offer me that is of significance. فأعينوني بقوة. But what you can do is support me with your strength, right, with manpower. أجعل بينكم وبينهم ردما. I will erect a fortified structure between you and them. Now, there's some lessons that can be taken here as well. Dhul Qarnayn already has an expansive empire and expansive dominion, okay? So he doesn't really need these people. They obviously are more in need of him. And also they're, like we mentioned, they're in a position of vulnerability. So let's assume that, they don't have many means. Now this situation is so dire that whatever they do have, whatever they do have left, they're willing to give to the Qarnayn to rid them of this issue. So there are many situations, especially if you reflect on today's world, there are many situations in which people are in a position of desperation. Well, whatever circumstances plague them, they're in a situation of desperation where they desperately need help. And then there are people who are who aren't experiencing the same realities or are insulated from those realities. And people kind of in that situation fall into two types. Those who are, or maybe three types. Those who, are unbothered. Those who say, who look at that situation and say, well, this doesn't really affect my life, so it doesn't really concern me, and they just continue doing what they do and living their life however they need to. Those who look at that imbalance as an opportunity to exploit. So they say people are in dire straits, so they are willing, and they're willing to basically spend or exert whatever resources they can because the situation is so dire. Right? There is that, in economics, there is the concept of price elasticity of demand, right? So the more somebody needs a service, the more they're willing to pay for it. And now that's where ethics come in. It's like, okay, well, say somebody needs a life-saving medication, for example, right? You can basically charge whatever you want for it because people need it, but should you? And so likewise, they're in this situation, right? They're in this very vulnerable situation, and they've expressed that, and they're willing to spend whatever it takes, even though they may not have it because the situation is so dire. And Dhul Qarnayn, being in a position of power, has every opportunity to say, yeah, give me all your money, and on top of that, you're gonna have to pay me in installments for, whatever, in perpetuity for blah 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 blah, however long. But again, we said that his concern is to rule with justice. His concern is the well-being of people. His concern is to be a dutiful servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, look, I don't need your money. Allah has given me much better. But what I could use and what I do need from you is support and manpower. Why? Because this is a great undertaking, but also because we should also be actively involved in whatever efforts are being made for our own well-being, right? This concept of, let me just throw money at the problem, or let me just kind of sit back passively and engage with the problem, is not something from our tradition. And so he enlists them to support, right? To also exert themselves under his leadership. So obviously up to this point, they didn't have the expertise or the knowledge or the resources or the ability to do it themselves. But Dhul Qarnayn doesn't just say, look, all right, pay me and sit back and I'll figure it out. He also empowers them to work for themselves as well, under his guidance, under his leadership, right? So he creates a means for them to empower themselves. And he doesn't exploit them while having every opportunity to be able to do that. فأعينوني بقوة أجعل بينكم وبينهم ردما آتوني زبر الحديد. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elaborates on the kind of the strategy that's being employed. آتوني زبر الحديد, bring me these large pieces of iron. حتى إذا ساوى بين الصدفين قال انفخوا, until there is enough iron that filled the space, the gap between these two mountains, between these two sides. He said, blow. And this blowing here is in reference to kind of bellows, as you heat this metal in order to kind of melt it down and create like this molten liquid metal from it, right? Until it I'm forgetting the exact term, but until it it heats up and then it becomes liquid, and then later on it cools into a different structure, a different form. حتى إذا جعله نارا, until it's hot enough, until it reaches a state. قال آتوني أفرغ عليه قطرة. So now he mixes that and he pours molten copper over it. So now this structure, this barrier is composed of iron and copper. Okay, and it's a very large undertaking, obviously, or from what we kind of assume. It's what we can kind of derive from these reflections is that this is a large undertaking, and they dedicated considerable time, effort, and manpower and resources to it. فما استطاعوا أن يظهروه وما استطاعوا له نقبا. Now, speaking of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, those it was intended to protect against, فما استطاعوا أن يظهروه, they could neither overcome it, like meaning scale it, go over it, وما استطاعوا له نقبا, nor could they penetrate it from underneath. So they could neither go through it, go under it, or go over it, right? They were trapped. So this was the situation of these this third group of people. Now again, there's much conversation, there's much in the hadith about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, and there's a little bit more mention of them in the coming ayat. But thus far, we understand that this was what became of them. Now, the hadith mentioned that they are still to this day contained behind this barrier. And there's conversation and speculation about where this place is. Again, ultimately there is no authentic means of knowing where this specific location is on this earth. We know that it exists. We know that it's there from our sources, but we don't really have any way of discerning exactly whatever the exact location of it. How do we understand this? From the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and the ayats of the Quran in which they are referenced. And what we also know is that there will come a time, one of the major signs of the Day of Judgment towards the very end of time is that they will finally overcome this barrier. Is it true by reading Surah al-Kahf it also prevents them from breaking the barrier? That I'm not totally familiar with. What's mentioned in the hadith is that every night they basically endeavor to try and penetrate this barrier until they basically retire for the night, or they stop for the night, and then overnight, so basically they tell themselves, look, we'll get back to this in the morning, or we'll continue later, and every night Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reinforces that barrier until one night the one who's in charge of kind of managing this whole effort will basically say, inshallah, we'll return back and continue where we left off. And at that point, the barrier will, the work that they did basically will not be undone, right? And they'll be able to escape. Now, what's actually an interesting correlation is that this idea of saying inshallah is also referenced earlier in the surah. Number one, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, right? when the Prophet ﷺ told the people of Mecca, when they asked him these questions, I'll give you the answer tomorrow, and he didn't say inshallah, and there was an extended period of time that passed before he was given revelation. And Allah also informs him, do not say concerning anything that you intend to do, that you plan to do in the future, that you'll do something definitively except if Allah wills. And also Musa alayhi salam, when he's enlisting, or when he is asking to follow Khidr, and Khidr says you won't be able to be patient, Musa alayhi salam says, قَالَ سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صَابِرًا. If Allah wills, you'll find me to be patient, right? And so likewise, that barrier will ultimately be broken when they refer that matter back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is, again, a broader indication that none of these things that take place, none of these physical things that take place, we shouldn't put so much trust and faith in these physical realities, because ultimately their function is ultimately reliant on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can take every, measure, we can, forecast every possibility, we can calculate every formula, and ultimately if what we're trying to achieve runs contrary to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will never happen. And this is why that larger theme that we'll kind of get back to, right? This faith versus this worldview issue, right? Understanding or believing in the unseen versus just believing in this material reality. It gives a lends a different perspective to how we perceive these physical and material phenomena. So, فَمَا اسْطَاعُوا أَن يَظْهَرُوهُ وَمَا اسْتَطَاعُوا لَهُ نَقْبًا, right? They were unable to basically overcome or penetrate this barrier, whether above or below or through it. Now there is some mention that's given to the word here. If you'll notice, the first word is ista'u and the second word is istata'u. Both of them carry a similar meaning, which is basically the ability to do something. But typically in Arabic, what's understood as a general principle is that الزيادة في المبنى يدل على الزيادة في المعنى. If there is more, there's additional letters, or there's something added to the physical makeup of a word, right? An additional letter, for example, and how a word is made up, that usually indicates an additional meaning, okay? And likewise, vice versa. If there's less, the same applies. And there's a previous example in Surah al-Kahf, in the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, where in the beginning, Khidr says to Musa alayhi salam, after the 3 strikes are basically complete, he says, سَأُنَبِّئُكَ بِتَأْوِيلِ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. And then in the second ayah, he says, ذَلِكَ تَأْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. The first is تَسْتَطِعْ, the second is تَسْطِعْ. Now here is إِسْطَعُ and إِسْتَطَعُ, right? So in that indication, it meant, or in that instance, it meant the first meaning, you weren't able to exercise any sort of patience over these issues, right? You didn't have the ability to exercise patience over these things. And in the second, not even the slightest bit. You didn't have the slightest bit of patience, the slightest bit of ability to exercise patience with these matters. And now here, the meaning is they were unable to ascend or overcome this barrier above it. وَمَا اسْتَطَاعُوا, and neither were they able to do it underneath or below. And that's an indication that to do it, to break through a barrier from within it or from underneath it, is actually more difficult than to scale something, right? It takes more effort. And so that's where that istata'u also indicates, right? That's just one reflection that the scholars of Tafsir and some of the grammarians make about the wording here. Now, before we get into the next ayah, I want you to kind of think about if this feat that was just accomplished by the Qarnayn with the support of these people, but ultimately by his knowledge and his leadership and his, his guidance, if it's a simple thing or a difficult thing, right? If it's like a great feat or a whatever, something that just is unremarkable. All right, it's obviously something that's that's quite remarkable, right? It's quite difficult, especially given that we have this fallacy, and again, even the wording sometimes might indicate this fallacy that we have, but we have this belief and understanding that perhaps simpler for him than obviously simpler for him, but still something that's quite significant. And you might even argue something that was unrivaled ever until that point, and maybe even after, right? Something that had never been done before. Now, we have this this belief that we are in the most advanced technological position in human history. And perhaps maybe there might be some things that we have now that haven't been done before. But when we hear these accounts of some of the you know, the power and the might that those that came before had, right, we kind of have to question that assumption. You hear about the kingdom of Sulaiman alayhi salam, or Dawood alayhi salam, or even the Qarnayn, or even during the times of Fir'aun, right, with Haman and with Qarun, or even as Allah describes the structures of the people of Ad and the people of Thamud, right? These are incredible feats of technology. So in any case, let's assume that even for that time, it was probably even more significant. Maybe not for the Qarnayn, but in comparison to the rest of the world. And if you look at any sort of civilization, any sort of statehood, or any sort of government structure, any sort of group of people, when they accomplish something of significance, like technologically speaking, or in terms of some sort of intellectual advancement or whatever, they basically tell anybody who will listen about it, right? It becomes the not only that, it becomes kind of the crux of their identity. They become known for that thing. They derive their pride from that thing. They might even name themselves after that thing. And so, the examples are countless, right? But Dhul Qarnayn, after having accomplished this massive task, this massive undertaking, how does he respond? He says, قَالَ هَذَا رَحْمَةٌ مِّن رَبِّي. This is a mercy from my Lord. فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ رَبِّي جَعَلَهُ دَكَّاءَ وَكَانَ وَعْدُ رَبِّي حَقًّا. But when the time comes, right, when the appointed time of my Lord arrives, he will cause it to be razed to the ground, flattened, right? And not only this structure, but all of his dominion, all of the earth even, right? There comes a time where everything that has been built will be destroyed. Everything that has been built up will come crashing down, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in many places in the Quran. Even earlier in Surah al-Kahf, there was an allusion to this as well. And so anyways, Dhul Qarnayn recognizes this reality and says, and gives the full credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هَذَا رَحْمَةٌ مِّن رَبِّي. Right? He doesn't, he's not deluded by his power, not deluded by his authority. And this is the difference. This is the difference. We spoke so far about the companions of the cave, the man of the two gardens, Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, and now Dhul Qarnayn. If you look at the man of the two gardens, right? He was given much less in terms of material wealth and authority than Dhul Qarnayn. But he got so caught up in this material reality that he was given, he started to believe in it. He started to derive all of his understanding, his trajectory in life, his ideology, everything he centered around his wealth. And ultimately his wealth came and was destroyed, right? وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ فَأَصْبَحَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فِيهِ, Allah says, right? Everything came, all of his wealth was destroyed. But now Dhul Qarnayn, his wealth is only a means for him to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this reality is much different, because this understanding of the hereafter, right? One of the earliest things that Qarnayn mentions is that there's accountability in the hereafter. And now again, he's referencing there will be a time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take all of this back, will destroy everything, right? And this is another allusion to the unseen. So now you see how his movement in life, right, is is balanced and measured and tethered by his understanding of the hereafter, his understanding of the unseen, his connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the wealth and the power and the authority doesn't delude him, doesn't take him away, doesn't cause him to be oppressive to himself and to others. Whereas the story of humanity has always been the case, that has always been the case, except in small groups of people who have an awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You think about just the diseases that have spread, the famine, the difficulty, the loss of life, the loss of family, the loss of wealth, the loss of health, all of these things that stem from people's avarice and people's mismanagement of the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, right? So he recognizes and he gives credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He recognizes this as a mercy from Allah and also recognizes the reality that everything shall come to pass, right? Nothing that will remain except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his authority and his might. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. وتركنا بعضهم يومئذ يموج في بعض. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transitions again to a discussion about the hereafter. Okay, and so inshallah we'll go through these ayat quickly, and then we'll do hopefully a quick recap and conclusion of the surah. وَتَرَكْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَمُوجُ فِي بَعْضٍ. On that day, we will leave them to يَمُوجُ بَعْضَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَمُوجُ فِي بَعْضٍ, meaning that some of them will go over and kind of basically be like layered on top of one another like waves. And this can refer to the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, as the Prophet describes to us, that they are so large in number that even one narration mentions that of every 1,000 people in the hellfire, they will comprise 999 of them. Another narration mentions that they'll come across a large body of water, and when the first of them starts to drink from it, by the time the last of them gets there, it'll be completely empty, and they'll say that there used to be water here, right? So there's so many of them that even in this place where they're confined, right, it's like they're toppling over one another. This can also be a reference to just the difficulty and the frantic nature of the Day of Judgment. وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ فَجَمَعْنَاهُم جَمْعًا. When the trumpet will be blown, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's when they will all be gathered together. We know that there is the trumpet, there is the blowing of the trumpet that will cause everyone to perish, and then there's the blowing of the trumpet that will cause everybody to be gathered for reckoning, right? And this is done by the angel Israfil. وَعَرَضْنَا جَهَنَّمَ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَرْضًا. And there will be a grand presentation, an unveiling, if you will, a bringing forth of the hellfire for the disbelievers. And this is also mentioned earlier in the surah as well. الَّذِينَ كَانَتْ أَعْيُنُهُمْ فِي غِطَاءٍ عَنْ ذِكْرِي وَكَانُوا لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ سَمْعًا. Those whose eyes were shrouded, were blocked, were blind to my signs, to my remembrance. وَكَانُوا لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ سَمْعًا. And they were unable to hear. Now this inability to hear obviously is not a physical one, but they didn't exercise their faculty of hearing to reflect and internalize the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or his remembrance. This is quite important because ultimately the material reality around us, right, wherever people derive their sense of knowledge and their sense of conviction, it's either from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation, or it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Okay, it's either derived as a means of revelation or as a means of creation, right? Something that is derived from their senses, or something that is derived from revelation. Okay, now in reality, those who draw their belief and their understanding from revelation, their understanding of creation and their senses conforms or supports what they know from revelation. those who have no understanding of revelation, what they perceive from reality, what they perceive from the material world, actually betrays what the reality is, and what the actual true reality is. Okay, so Allah says these people were blind to the signs, to my remembrance. They saw Allah's creation, but they didn't connect that back to the Creator. In fact, they took their belief and their dedication and their conviction in Allah's creation over Him. Now, there are those who don't claim belief in anything or in any sort of higher power, but they do believe in a material reality, and in so doing, they're thus being subservient or taking Allah's creation as, um, uh, you know, as awliya, basically as supporters, as gods, as deities other than Allah. So then Allah says, أَفَحَسِبَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَن يَتَّخِذُوا عِبَادِي مِن دُونِ أَوْلِيَاءَ. Did those who disbelieve and rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs and his way, the way he intended for the creation on earth, did they think that they could take my servants as masters instead of me? Now, well, you might say, well, some people don't believe in anything, so how are they taking anything as masters? It's not like they're worshiping these things. But no, they're worshiping, they're living according to ideologies that are based in these material realities. And they are basically, in essence, now taking Allah's servants, Allah's creation, as supporters and as masters instead of Allah. It's kind of a deep concept that we're going through kind of quickly, but we need to really reflect and internalize that. Ultimately, all of these things are servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, let's take the the calculations that we use the celestial bodies for, right? The sun, the moon, the stars, and how we derived our understanding of weather from it, our understanding of seasons, our understanding of time. And perhaps now people, based on their understandings of time and weather, biology, all these different sciences, now they have developed a worldview and an understanding that they basically can encompass all knowledge of creation. Well, in reality, those things are servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الشمس والقمر بحسبان, Allah says. The sun and the moon are following a specified course set by Allah. And that's a crash course, ultimately, because we know they'll be destroyed. وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The stars, the trees, they prostrate before Allah. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. There is nothing except that it glorifies the praises of Allah. وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. However, it is only you that don't understand their praising of Allah. Right? So all of these things are servants of Allah. Whether they be human beings, or people who worship, for example, Isa alayhi salam, or worship different human beings, or people who worship these ideologies and their beliefs, or whatever they take as determining their way of life. Inna a'tadna jahannama lil kafirina nuzula. We have prepared Jahannam, the hellfire, as an abode, as a final resting place for those who reject and do this, right? Who disbelieve. قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا. Allah says, shall we inform you, tell you about those who are most at loss because of their deeds? Those who lose out most, those who are the most, incur the most loss, as a result of their deeds. الَّذِينَ ضَلَّ سَعْيُهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. All of their efforts, all of their endeavors, all of their toiling, and all of their everything they work towards in this worldly life are in delusion, are in misguidance. But they assume and they think, while they believe and they think that they are doing good work, right? That they're actually doing something noteworthy, or doing something beneficial, or that they're actually doing a lot of good things, right? They're completely lost. They think that they are, and there's so much to be taken from this ayah, right? So much to be taken from this ayah. But again, it's one that we should reflect on a lot by ourselves. They think that they're doing what's right, but in reality, they're only furthering their their downfall in the hereafter, and further deluding themselves and misguiding others. أولئك الذين كفروا بآيات ربهم ولقائه. And why do they do this? Because they made a fatal flaw, and that fatal flaw is that they didn't understand that everything was leading them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They rejected the signs, and they rejected meeting Allah, the meeting before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. Allah says, oh human being, you are moving, transitioning, toiling laboriously towards your Lord, and you will meet him. All paths, no matter how you're working, no matter what you're doing, all paths return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they rejected, they didn't take this meeting seriously. فَحَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُم. So all that effort that they did was for nothing. All of their deeds amounted to nothing. فَلَا نُقِيمُ لَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَزْنًا. And that they won't have anything to stand on, any weight to stand for them on that day, right? You think about like the man of the two gardens. Allah says, وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ فَأَصْبَحَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فِيهَا. Now everything came destroyed. He saw all of his life's work, all of his effort, all of his wealth destroyed before him. And now he's just, like folding his hands and like doing this, like out of just straight, like complete despair and like, just being totally shocked and at a loss because of everything he spent. Everything he spent on it, and now it's for nothing. So this is the same reality Allah is describing. ذلك جزاؤهم جهنم بما كفروا واتخذوا آياتي ورسلي هزوا. This is what they get. This is their reward, the hellfire, because of their disbelief and them taking Allah's signs and his messengers as a joke. Right? It doesn't need much elaboration for us to understand how faith-based communities and how a belief in the hereafter nowadays is considered a joke, right? But Allah says in various places in the Quran, فَالْيَوْمَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ يَضْحَكُونَ. On that day, the believers will then be laughing at the disbelievers. They'll see that joy then, right? That, what has become of you now? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ كَانَتْ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتُ الْفِرْدَوْسِ نُزُلًا. Now, the juxtaposition, the believers, those who did heed Allah's signs and his warnings, those who believe and do righteous deeds, they will have Jannah. They will have Jannatul Firdaus, the highest levels of Jannah as their abode. خالدين فيها لا يبغون عنها حولا. They will be remain therein forever, eternally. لا يبغون عنها حولا. Never, wanting any sort of anything different. Right? They'll be completely pleased in that reality. قل لو كان البحر مدادا لكلمات ربي لنفد البحر. You human being, you think you understand the world. You think you've, figured it all out, right? One thing that you'll notice, this worldview thing runs very deep. I don't know if any of you have ever kind of noticed this in like pop culture and in movies and in, whatever's out there. There is this like, underlying belief that's often injected into these things, which basically is that, the secular worldview, which basically purports that or upholds that human beings are the masters of their own fate. I don't know about you guys, but one of the movies that I really enjoyed watching was Interstellar, right? And Interstellar is like a really great movie, but there is this like spoiler alert if you haven't watched it by now, that's on you. But basically, the gist of it is that, right, it is a common theme. The gist of it is that, there's this like communication that people are noticing from some other, celestial beings that they can't really figure it out. And that's kind of what drives the beginning of the movie. And then ultimately what you find out at the end is that that's actually human beings just who have advanced and like, just understood more about the world and space and all this other stuff, right? So basically saying that we're all that there is. We are the masters of, our intellect collectively, our collective progress as a species is all that's out there. That's the greatest intelligence that's out there, right? It's such a deluded, arrogant belief. And it's the same thing because of the man's prowess, his material progress, the man of the two gardens, he said that وَمَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ وَمَا ما أظن أن تبيد هذه أبدا وما أظن الساعة قائمة. I think I figured it out. Like, I'm never gonna lose out on this. I've basically, cracked the code. And even if at some point, there is a hereafter, there is something that's beyond, I'll even be at the top of that too, just because of how great I am, right? So this is here as well, right? قُلْ لَوْ كَانَ الْبَحْرُ مِدَادًا لِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي. What the reality is that if all the oceans were ink, لِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي, for the كَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي here literally means the words of my Lord, right? But many of the scholars of Tafsir, they elaborate upon this, saying that كَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says kun fayakun. Whenever he intends a matter to take place, he says be and it is. So for all of the commands and all of the um, all of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, basically, right? Bikalimati Rabbi, all of the affairs, all of the commands of my Lord. If all of the water, all of the oceans, all of the water, the bodies of water on this earth were ink, then it would all run out, run dry before the words and before the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were exhausted. Meaning that you'll never be able to encompass the reality of what really is. You'll never be able to. Allah is beyond. And so we should find humility in suspending and understanding where our ability stops. Even if more and more and more were added, right? You can't encompass something infinite with something finite. It'll never happen. So we are limited based on us being human. And that doesn't take anything away from us, but rather when we recognize that and submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we are elevated as a result. Now, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. The next ayah says, in the last ayah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, just give me one moment. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet ﷺ, say, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. Say, I am nothing but a human being like you. So now the question comes, so the prophets are nothing but human beings, okay? So they have the same, in terms of like their physical reality, right? And not like exactly, but they kind of have the same limitations as us, as human beings, meaning that, they live and they die, they eat and they sleep, right? All these physical realities, human realities. But what is the difference? So why should we give any credence to what they have to say? Why yuha ilay? The difference is that they are given revelation. Yuha ilay. And what does that revelation call towards? Annama ilahukum ilahun wahid. That your Lord, that your the object of your devotion, the object of your sacrifice, the object of your effort, the object of your movement in this world is one, is Allah alone. And if you want to compare, just look at the results and look at the asks. Someone might say, well, isn't that convenient, right? Isn't that a means for somebody to be taken advantage of or exploited? For somebody to just say, well, I'm a representative of Allah and I'm given revelation or whatever, right? Well, number one, have you actually investigated the reality of that revelation? What does it say? What realities does it call towards? What proofs and evidences does it bring? Number two, what is the reality of the caller, of the messenger? What are they asking for? How are they as a person? Are they, is this a means of advancement for themselves in their own material reality? Right? The prophets could never be accused of any of that, especially the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? When did he ever ask? When was he ever in material riches? Like, when did he ever live a lavish lifestyle? What did he ask of people, right? Did he use that authority for some sort of... Now look at the contrast. Every other worldview, right? If you're so skeptical of revelation, okay, look at the contrast. The other worldviews, do you find people living in decadence, in luxury, exploiting people, taking advantage? These other forms of life, these other understandings of the world and of reality, do they lead to a just, equitable, fair society? Absolutely not. So just look at the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, right? Um, yuha ilay. So this is the differentiator, revelation. And so this is, again, back to that conversation of worldviews. Our belief, just like we started out, our belief also encompasses our senses, what we can observe of the world, what we can deduce from the world, but also our primary source of knowledge is revelation. And the majority of our effort should be is dedicated towards confirming whether that is authentic or not. Once we've arrived at its authenticity, then we accept it and submit to it. Why? Because it comes directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ. Now, assuming that you have accepted this reality truly, that you truly believe in a hereafter, you truly believe in accountability, you truly believe in an existence beyond your physical one, beyond your material one, beyond what you can perceive with your senses. Assuming that you accept that, and you are hoping, you are aware of this meeting with Allah, and you are hoping that it's a good one. You're looking forward to this meeting with Allah, because then you know that's where ultimate felicity and success and happiness lies. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ. Okay? Whoever is looking towards this meeting, or is understanding this meeting, فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. And likewise, on the flip side, whoever is wary of this meeting in terms of the accountability that comes along with it, فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. Let them do righteous deeds, وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. And not take any partners, any associations, any other, um, you know, um, any other masters, or any other lords, or anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let them not devote themselves in that way to anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The surah begins with the description of the hereafter and the reality, and the surah ends with the description of that reality. The surah begins قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا. And the surah ends with the description of the hellfire and Jannah, and the meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And everything in between is what illustrates that reality. Now we reflect back on the reality of the Dajjal. This surah protects against the Dajjal. Okay? The Dajjal derives his power from his ability to create, or to make things happen in this material world that people are so enamored by, people are so mesmerized by, people are so, they have such a voracious appetite for, that they follow everything he says, because he gives them these material realities. He, manipulates this material existence for them in a way that they can't describe. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet tell us that the reality is that these are just illusions. These are just him, manipulating these things with the assistance of, jinn, or with the assistance of, whatever else, but they're just illusions. But because people are so locked into this material reality, they, they follow him. They listen to whatever he has to say, right? And these are not simple little tests. The Prophet says no prophet has come except that he warned his people from this imposter. Okay, so that's one. The other is that you look at the worldviews that kind of accompany both of these understandings, the hereafter one and the material one, and then you focus again on the four stories that were mentioned. Look at the companions of the cave. Right, the society that was oppressing them had no value that they gave to people of faith, and so they outright persecuted those who held beliefs that ran contrary to their system of governance, their way of life. And if you don't have what value do people like that have? If you don't have an understanding of the hereafter or the unseen, what value do faith-based communities have aside from just diverse identity markers? What's their role? We measure people in today's world by how productive they are. The value of a person is directly tied to how much they can produce, materially speaking. The health of a country is measured based on how much it produces, how wealthy how the power of its currency backed by its production capability. Your value, right? GDP, right? Gross domestic product. Your value in a corporation is determined based on how much return you're getting on investment. And these realities are important for specific ends, right? But is that really what the value of a person, of a people, of a society, of a community really is? So the people of the cave were persecuted because there was no value given to that. The man of the two gardens looked down upon his neighbor, the man who had less than him, because he had less than him, because he didn't measure up. Like literally speaking, he didn't measure up. Musa alayhi salam, the lesson that he learned from Khidr was that the material, things that we see around us, often there's a deeper understanding, a deeper meaning, a deeper reality behind them that we can't comprehend unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us. Right? The things that Khidr was doing. Now al-Qarnayn, we see this power that he had and how ultimately it didn't mean anything to him if not to, number one, uplift people, or not number one, follow the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, lead to justice. Number three, uplift people and serve Allah's creation, not exploit Allah's creation. Right? The test of faith, holding on to one's faith, the test of wealth, how it might delude people or take one away from the reality, the test of knowledge, right? And knowing when to stop, when we can no longer comprehend without Allah's support. And then number four, the test of power and authority, right? How it can drive people and cause the most corruption and destruction on this earth if understood improperly. And ultimately, what is the reality of these things? That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them all destroyed, they would be destroyed. And in reality, there will be a time where they all will be destroyed. And if we are smart, we'll prepare ourselves for that time and not get so caught up that when it finally arrives upon us, we're caught by surprise. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the disbelievers on that day, right? هَذَا يَوْمُكُمُ الَّذِي كُنْتُمْ تُوعَدُونَ. This is what you were promised. This is what you were promised all along. أين شركاؤكم الذين كنتم تدعون من دون الله? Where are all those things that you put so much effort and energy into? Where are they now? Right? So this is the conclusion, inshallah, that we take. Inshallah, we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit and reflect on the best of that which was said and heard, act upon the best of that which was said and heard. Anything that we said that was a mistake was from ourselves. Anything that was of benefit and of that was true was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be people who internalize and act upon the realities of Surah al-Kahf that we recited every week, that we remember its lessons, that we are people who pass the test of faith, of wealth, of knowledge, and of power. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people who uphold and seek His pleasure and His reward and His meeting in everything that we do, and that we are people who live lives of accountability, lives that take into account the realities of the unseen, of the hereafter, of the day of judgment, of Jannah and Jahannam. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of true consciousness and true awareness. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. There's a quick question, maybe a broad question, but in a secular society, how do you reconcile these two worldviews? Because like you said, the non-materialistic worldview is often laughed at. That's a good question. The truth behind that is that, well, you reconcile these two worldviews by holding fast to what you have, right? Take lesson from the story of the people of the cave and know that your sacrifice ultimately, will be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Your confidence should be derived from the fact that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has said this, right? The one who has control over all of this, or the one who can change the reality in a moment's notice, right? Even less than that. So we stick to what we have. We stick to that. And then also we use our intellect and our faculties to poke holes and point out the flaws of these alternative worldviews, right? And not take them for granted, not take them as perfect, right? We use what Allah has blessed us with in terms of our faculty to point out the flaws in them, right, where they fall short. And hopefully, I don't know if that answers your question, but um, hopefully that helps. So inshallah, we'll conclude here.